So good day, everyone. Today we've got the VSP Maestro, that's how I call her, ArielleGuttman. And we've got her to sit down and talk about probably one of the most important conflicts that arose in recent times, which is what's going on in Israel and Palestine. So good day, Ariel.
Hello, Donnie. Nice to have you. Nice to be with
Uh,
you. This is our YouTube channel for the VenusStarPoint teachings. So one of the reasons we wanted to talk with you about this, Donnie, is
yeah.
we've had an ongoing series about how the Venus Star Point works in people's charts, but usually we're talking about people. Occasionally we talk about how it works in countries' charts, but it really has a lot to do with world affairs. Wouldn't you agree? The transiting Venus stars, how it affects everybody.
Oh yeah, I mean that's how I apply transit VSPs, at least in my application. I do include like what's happening at large and what it actually symbolically ties back into the, well, I shall call it the alchemical spiral of the Venus star points journey in
Yeah, it
transit.
is an alchemical spiral too. That's a good way to put it. It is a
Yeah.
spiral. Um, I'm not so connected to world affairs and mundane. I know you are. I'm going to ask you some questions that get your viewpoint on things. Um, I'm This is a horrible thing. Since I woke up that Saturday a week ago with the news of the war beginning, I've been in deep shock and pain, as much of the world is. And war affects us all on this tiny little planet. We are all sensitive to it, no matter how far away it is. But more than anything, than just a war, this is a big war because it does affect pretty much the whole world. Everybody is becoming so polarized on this subject, and and even taking sides. And this is not something I want to do. I think both sides are right. I think both sides are wrong. I think, there's got to be somewhere in the middle where we can meet. And hopefully, with all this Libra energy and the Libra eclipse, that the bottom line will be that there can be some meeting in the middle as a conclusion. Because that's the thing about Libra. There's every chart we're going to look at today has a lot of Libra in it. And we're going to be looking at the archetype Libra in action here, right?
I mean, Libra, well, at least how I know Libra is basically the seventh house energy, but the
Yeah,
seventh house energy is also the one that's the most tension filled as well.
yeah.
That's how I view it
Because it's
because
opposite the self, right? It's
it's the
like here am
only,
I, and then there is everybody else.
because if you think about it, among the 12 zodiacal signs, only Libra has an inanimate object to represent itself, the scales. The rest,
Hmm.
they usually have some kind of human or animal representation. But
Right.
for Libra, it's a very unique case. It's scales. It's the only inanimate object. So a little bit
Yeah.
tip, when it's tipped off, it whole thing topples. So it's so delicate, I would say, but it's the most tension filled as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's even a theory that goes way back, which I don't want to get into now, that Libra was more or less squeezed into the zodiac between Virgo and Scorpio a long time ago. That it wasn't thought of as a constellation, but then it became a constellation of the zodiac of the 12, because the 12 is a unique number. It matches the months. It matches, it's mathematically very easy to divide the circle into 12 and all the different ways we interpret it. But anyway, we're going to try to be speaking as objectively as possible. I've never asked you this, Donnie. We've worked together before. You're a Venus Starpoint um, student and teacher, one of our trained teachers. What kind of techniques do you use in astrological forecasting? For the most part, this is a two-part question.
Right.
And who in astrology were the teachers that most influenced you in the sort of direction you've taken with it?
Oh, the teachers, I mean, it's so varied, really. Because I do read a lot of astrological books. Ever since I was a student, really. And I always try to, or I at least aim to finish one book per quarter. So 4 books a
Uh-huh.
year. And
Mm-hmm.
I've slightly kind of, well, or should I say, like, I've disappointed myself by like not meeting that target, I would say, by reading 4 astrology books, new ones, which I haven't read in a year. But then from I would say that
You
from
mean read them all the way through from cover to
yes,
cover?
or at
Yeah,
least like suck out the
that's a
suck
challenge for a lot of us because we tend to, with astrology, we tend to go to this place or that place in a
yeah,
book, you know.
or at least I try to speed through it and just
Mm-hmm.
absorb like the key gist of things.
Mm-hmm.
And I usually have my page marker. I'm a consumer of a lot of page markers, and I usually like just color code it in my way, and so that I can go back and just like what do I need to look for, and just flip to that
Yeah.
page and just like read those few pages. I
So
couldn't.
do you have any books you want to mention?
Recently I've really been delving into midpoints. So things that are like midpoint driven, like the combination of
That's a
stellar
classic.
influences. That's a
Yeah.
classic. And I'm also delving into like midpoints using asteroids as well.
Mm.
So because that one will give such a like richer context into things. And for people who have like watched my latest video back in August talking about the current transit Leo Venus star point,
Mm-hmm.
I've actually combined midpoints that consist of Chiron, Vesta, Pallas, Venus,
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
name it,
Mm-hmm.
Ceres, and I find those like it really enriches the picture. And in retrospect, I think I've told the audience it's gonna be like a rough time with this Leo Venus star point currently. And true enough, there's like a whole bunch of dictatorial kind of energies that come with the Leo Venus star point squaring Uranus, by the way. So it adds on to the extremity of things.
Yeah, you know, we all talked about that Venus star point in Leo, 20
Yeah.
degrees Leo squaring Uranus. And in its cycle, 3 times this year, the Venus cycle was going to square Uranus 3 times, but the star point squared it pretty closely within 2 degrees. And, you know, I was thinking a lot about surprise this, surprise that, something different, whatever. Well, here was a surprise attack.
Mm.
Um, that was one aspect, you know, I didn't think of. It was a surprise attack of war, but it was like expect the unexpected. Something's going to hit you from left field. And the other thing about this is so interesting. Um, I know you would probably talk about this later, but you know, Venus just came out of her retrograde cycle
Mm.
as a morning star,
Yeah.
and the ancient idea was that the morning star was the goddess of war, that Venus presented herself in a war-like fashion once she came out of retrograde and became a morning star. And both the Ukraine war that began in February of 22, that was the inception of which was just following Venus coming out of retrograde as a morning star. And this is our very next one, Venus coming out of retrograde in Leo as a morning star, and shortly after the Israel war begins. So it's holding to form in terms of the morning star being associated with the goddess of war.
Yeah, and I actually use also aspects in which is not as well known. I actually look at this aspect which is like 165 degrees. Um, Depending how you pronounce
Yes.
it, can be
Yeah.
quindicille or quindicille.
Quindicili, I think is
Yeah,
what they call it.
yes.
Yeah, it's one of those. Yeah.
Yeah,
And what
because
that's
it's
composed of what? That's a square plus a What is that exactly? It's
Because it's
165.
165. So it's a trine with a semi-square.
A trine with a semi-square.
So
Trine.
120
Yeah,
plus
that's
45 is
yeah.
165.
So if it's composed of a trine plus a semi-square, what does that mean? That the trine is the base, and then there's a kind of a tension point
Tension.
that's reached after that trine?
So when I see a 165-degree aspect, I usually see it as, I mean, if I actually read something like a vocational reading, I usually read into the 165-degree aspect because that can be like a career building aspect because it impels you to do something because of the irritation from the semi-square.
Yeah.
But then if you manage to push it through, it's free flowing, it's a trine. So it's also the aspect of deep motivation and determination, actually. Be
Determination and motivation. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you may also do some form of innovation with it down the line as well. And this brings me back to the Leo Venus star point because the Leo Venus star point is in 165-degree aspect to Saturn in Pisces.
Oh, okay.
So this brings in the water element, Pisces by the sea. And we know Gaza is facing the shore, and Saturn blocks it. And if we actually think about it,
Yeah, and they're speaking a lot about the blockade,
yeah.
which is a true
So,
Saturn type terminology.
and to block is also to have sanctions. So people
Yeah,
are like governments are throwing sanctions up, down, left, and right. If you think about it, once the Leo Venus star point actually phased in as well. And
right.
there's talk about either lifting or imposing even more sanctions. I think the EU basically was going to investigate whether to put a sanction on China's electric vehicles because of the unfair competition, because of extensive state subsidization that makes them so cheap,
Mhm.
and they could just dump those in the EU market. And so, I've been just having this word sanction being thrown around by
Mhm.
governments, which is Leo, throwing
Well,
sanctions.
that's a double-edged sword because getting more electronic vehicles on the road is, on the one hand, is a good thing for the environment, I suppose. There's doubts about that too. There's questions on both sides about that. But on the other hand, blocking them is, kind of delaying progress in that sense. So
Well, I
I
suppose it's
guess
also
there's
coming
two
from
sides of everything.
competition side because how about the EU car makers? It puts them at a disadvantage whereby you can buy a China EV vehicle for like much less. So, of course, politics is very tricky. There's always, the skill again,
Yeah.
Libra, and where we are going with this. So there's a lot of I would say social media has gone a bit too cray-cray recently about what has been going on. And I've also been looking at um, what's the implication of internet censorship that's coming up pretty soon. I think the EU has really introduced something like the Digital Services Act recently this year that aims to like restrict
Haven't heard
information.
about that yet.
Yeah, I think it's recently passed. So, but it's like not many people know about it, but I've been just diligently be doing my research and also what's going on in
I know you're Gemini. I know you're Gemini, and you're filled with so much information, so many facts. You read a lot. You do read a lot. You always are presenting a lot of um, interesting details that I haven't heard about. And I read a fair amount too, so I'm trying to stay on top of things. One other point I did want to mention, though, that you've probably noticed this too. Saturn and Pluto both have their south node in Capricorn. on or around the same degree of the eclipse in Libra, which squared them. We just had this eclipse in the last few days. We're actually recording this on October 16th. The eclipse was 3 days ago on 2 days ago, October 14th at 21 Libra. And the south node of Saturn and Pluto are both around that point, around 20-ish of Capricorn. So I'm thinking, wow, and this was a south node eclipse on the south node of the moon. So what does it mean to have the south node of the moon and an eclipse on it square to the south node of Saturn and Pluto? I mean, doesn't that sound like some pretty big themes playing out right now?
I mean, it just tells me about destabilizing foundations,
Yeah.
literally, because Saturn Pluto, when you wrote Saturn and Pluto, is literally like that. On one hand, since it's a
It's
square,
also death. I mean, I
it's also
remember
death.
looking at the Saturn-Pluto conjunction of 2020 that beforehand, when we were all looking at that, didn't know how it was going to happen, but it's always the fear of collective death. When Saturn and Pluto come together, there's usually going to be a lot of heads rolling and people dying. A very unfortunate fact. But and because Saturn, somebody in authority makes that decision that certain people are going to die now because that's
And
just the way it has to be.
and Saturn is that authority figure, right? And Pluto is the eruptive energy that's is almost like volcanic in nature. So there's a lot of protests going on. I suppose we've seen either on social media or people that we know who partake in
Yeah.
protests. And so it is a very supercharged eclipse. I must say that people. I'm sure the audience can hear that my throat is a bit gone. I've been feeling unwell leading up to that Libra eclipse, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. So, okay, I'm going to start. Let's get going with some charts here. Um, and I'll share my screen first. And I again, I'm wanting this to be helpful for people to look at the astrology, not taking sides, not commenting on who's right or who's wrong or why it happened. Let's just look at what happened and see what we can learn from this and how we go forward. So, okay, why isn't my thing working to move the slides? There we go. There we go. Okay. So just as a recap for those of you who are this down here, those of you who are tuning into the Venus Star Points for the first time, we have a lot of videos on our YouTube channel that describe what the Venus Star Point is, how it works, the long cycle of Venus, the shorter cycles of Venus. So if you want to learn more, go ahead and look at those videos. But this is just a brief idea of what is the Venus star. It's when the sun and Venus come together in a conjunction or in a cazimi, when Venus is in the heart of the sun. And it does this in the Venus Earth cycle is 1.6. So it does this every 1.6 years in starting its cycle in retrograde. And so these are the 5 points. The whole star is called the Venus star, but there's what we call a star point. VSP equals a Venus star point. And so each of the 5 points individually is a star point in and of itself. And each of these star points, starting at different times, lasts for about 100 years through a sign. And they change signs at different times. So they're not all changing together. But right now, we are clearly in a change period, a changeover period. And ever since I started working with the Venus star, I've been talking about the 2020s as a very big changeover period because we are leaving behind the 100-year transit of the Venus star through Scorpio and going into a new 100-year cycle of the Venus star point into Libra. So Libra is showing up on the world stage right now in a big way and will be for the next 100 years. And you're going to see that a lot of the charts we're going to be looking at today have a ton of Libra in them, because this eclipse in Libra is sort of part of it. Now, this eclipse is 9 degrees or 8 degrees away from the, at 21 degrees Libra, is 8 degrees away from the 29 Libra star point that we just had last, about a year ago, just about a year ago, October 2022. But these 5 points, even though you can say, well, that was last October, now we're in the Leo star point, which is right here, right at about 20 degrees Leo, right here. All 5 points of these stars are going to be like very sensitive and very powerful degrees for probably the whole 8 years. And because the star moves so slowly, it's barely off 1 degree and then on to the next degree. It takes a long time for that. So you want to look at these, star points pretty carefully in terms of how they're affecting you and the world and all of that, right? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to have one last Scorpio star point coming in 2026.
Yeah. Right.
But as far as I see from the active 5-pointed star, right now we are missing the element water until 2026.
Yes.
So water is that binding force. So it's the emotional bond. So it can either be we overcompensate and be too overly or overtly too emotionally attached to things, be it to like world events that's happening around us, and we can't find that emotional peace within.
Yeah.
Really, I'm trying to say that we can always be feeling on edge, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when there's no water, we overcompensate. Whenever there's not an element in a chart, we tend to overcompensate. Right now, the world is feeling the no water, and the overcompensation is extreme feeling, but it's feeling fueled by fire, because we have double fire on the star. We have Leo and Aries. And so the feelings come out in a very hot, fiery way. There's rage, there's anger, there's violence, there's the expression of, people are impatient, they're reactive to everything that's going on. There's not a sense of really kind of absorbing the feeling and dealing with it from the inside. It's just a feeling hits, boom, bounces off the wall and comes back out at you,
And there's double air as well. So anything that's like broadcasted or news-wise, it's super reactive. Because I do feel that water is the assimilation kind of energy.
Yeah.
So instead of assimilation, it's just pure reaction, I would say.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So, okay. So that's the basic. Now, this is quite interesting. What I'm going to do, I'm going to move this like that, so it won't be hiding my screen. So let's start with Israel's chart. There's a lot that you can say about this chart. People used to ask me, oh gosh, 20 years ago or more, 30 years ago even, when will there ever be peace in the Middle East? Because it seemed like there was always one war, then another, or some kind of skirmish or some kind of, activity going on. So I basically said, whoa, looking at Israel's chart, maybe there won't be peace until it gets a new chart. And, I kind of said that off the top because, looking at their chart, you can see it's pretty intense, especially with that 10th house. And we're talking about Saturn and Pluto, and the south node of Saturn and Pluto. that we're experiencing right now with this eclipse. But, Israel has a Saturn-Pluto conjunction in the chart, and it's a brand new cycle of the Saturn-Pluto. They had just come together, and Saturn's just starting to move away, but definitely an orb. But Saturn's there sitting between Pluto and Mars. And when you take this chart and put it on an astrocartography map, and then you have the black moon opposite, what you see is on all sides of Israel, there's enemy, which is true, and it shows up in the chart. But getting back to the star point, it was born as an evening star, Virgo evening star, and it was born in 1948 after World War II as a place, and after the Holocaust, as a place for the Jews of Europe and the world to come together to find a home, to find a homeland. But it was very complicated because there were Palestinians living there already. And so other world governments made this decision that they were going to bring the Jews here to this home. And yet it involved part of it involved the forced relocation of other people that were already there. Again, I'm not talking about the politics, but I'm looking at the Virgo star point square Mercury in Gemini, that Virgo, initially, it became the land. And there was a collection of what they called the kibbutz, which was a collective where people lived and worked on the kibbutz to plant the fields and grow and harvest. And it's very reminiscent of the earth goddess. And I have to say that I lived on a kibbutz for a while. And that while happened to be 1973, when one of those big wars came. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But this is Virgo. Now, we have a situation on the Venus star point where sometimes you can be born at the end of the star point cycle, or let's say at the end of the Venus cycle, before it's going to change or make a cazimi to the next star point. And this was the case when Israel was born. It was born in May of 1948, but in June of 48, a month and a half later, basically Israel progressed to the Cancer star point. So it went from an evening star to a Cancer star. And this is another thing that I did not pick up on, although a lot of people do follow this, and I would like to hear your comments on this too. But the Venus retrograde this year, 2023, went retrograde on Israel's Mars, 28 Leo. It went all the way back to 12 Leo, which is the Pluto of Israel. So it made both of its stations, which is a really powerful time for Venus when it stations, or any planet when it stations forward or backward. So it basically stationed on Mars one direction, Pluto the other direction. And I don't often, I do look at the stations in people's charts, but I wasn't studying all the world charts at that time. But had we been looking at Israel's chart at the time, I think somebody might have noticed that, hey, there's some action going on here that is going to result in something very dramatic with Mars and Pluto, like a war type of an event, especially because this most recent strike happened with Venus back at 28 degrees Leo, right on Israel's natal Mars. So it's kind of interesting. The other one thing I'll say, and then I'll, like feedback from you, was that at about age 40 is when this happened, this progression. So it went from an evening star, which is considered the love goddess, in the early days of the coming together of the land, of the people to the land, to a homeland. We had the love goddess functioning. But about age 40 years into its chart or its life, Israel experienced this change to a morning star, the war goddess, and in Cancer, conjunct its own Venus, which, by the way, is conjunct the US Venus and Jupiter. So there's been a lot of help and support and funding from the US, by the way. But this is interesting. The 2 points really that I wanted to make was the retrograde of Venus this year on the Mars and the Pluto. Do you have any thoughts on that, Donnie?
I mean, Israel's chart is very much indicating the powers of fixed stars, because when I look at the ascendant is on Spica or Speaker,
Right.
their midhaven at 25 Cancer is on this. How to pronounce it? Procyon.
I think it's Procyon.
Procyon is
Not
another
sure, but
very
I think it's
prominent fixed
Procyon.
star.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then
So
all the
Procyon's at 25 Cancer, is what you're saying?
very close to 25, 26, and all the planets that's in the sign of Leo is ruled by the sun. That's on this fixed star called Algol.
Right.
Or pretty close
It's
to
pretty
Algol.
close to Algol. Yeah.
And Algol is another prominent fixed star. Basically, it's the Medusa energy when we talk about Algol.
Yeah. And isn't Mars on Regulus also?
Mars is on Regulus, yeah. So you can see how many fixed stars just by like Ascendant is on one important one, Mars is on an important one, Midhaven is on an important one, Sun is on an important one. So Jupiter is also close to the galactic center in late Sag.
Right.
So you can see how like it's almost I couldn't help but think that, you know, like it's so prominently featured fixed star energies.
Yeah.
And going
so
back
what
to
is
that,
what is a key word or two, a key phrase for, let's say, Spica, where Israel's ascendant is?
Spica, it is military honor and preferment.
Okay, that's not a surprise.
That's not a surprise.
And Mars, military planet, is on Regulus, the star of fame.
To reign supreme, Regulus.
Yeah. And then Procyon, what is Procyon?
Procyon is actually, there's one of the side meaning of Procyon, which is to be feared by the region or surrounding cities or states.
Wow.
So talk about,
neighboring countries.
Neighboring cities or states, to be feared by. And I'm like, okay. I just kind of nodded.
Well, in Cancer, even in one's own home, you know, I also wanted to mention Vesta, 29 Cancer, a long time coming for this to be, for, you know, the people who had suffered so much and, you know, during the Holocaust, to finally find a home a few years after the war ended. And then we know what Algol is like, the sun on Algol or near it. So yeah, that's pretty interesting.
And Vesta at 29 Cancer, this degree and sign together, I've seen in other charts, it can represent like very wealthy. It can mean immense wealth as well. And
well, I think it is a wealthy country, and I can't help but notice the conjunction between, first of all, the progressed star point at 3 Cancer, which is now its new star point from that time going forward, on its own Venus, right? And then on top of that, on the United States Venus. So we know where a lot of the wealth and, you know, the two Venuses together, there's like some kind of, there's kind of a major cooperation going on there.
And if you look at just rulership, Venus is ruled by the moon, moon is ruled by the sun, sun is ruled by Venus. So these three planets are linked. via rulerships.
Right.
And so it links 8th, 9th, and 10th house together. So 8th house is other people's money, which is the funding. And 9th house overseas, across borders, money's coming from overseas. And 10th house is really like, the government's grip on the people.
Right.
So it makes perfect sense to me. And with so many fixed stars helping it, I'm just, yeah.
Right. Right. Another thing, since you're studying aspects a lot, and I studied this aspect quite a bit, we have a quincunx between the sun and the ascendant exact. They're both Venus ruled signs, but we have the sun in Taurus at 23 and Libra, ascendant at 23. So what do you make of that sun just inside the 8th house quincunx the ascendant? Because the ascendant is here I am world, here I am.
Yeah.
And then the sun is kind of slipped into the 8th house, which is kind of a behind the scenes house. I wouldn't say it's hiding, but it's it's cloaked.
Shadow house, I
At
think that's
times.
what it's called. Yeah.
It's what?
One of the shadow houses.
Yeah.
8th house is other people's money. So that's kind of self-explanatory to me. In the sign of Taurus, which is the, fiscal manifestation of like money coming in.
Right.
And this is pretty much linked to Venus and the moon via that tri-rulership that binds Sun, Moon, and Venus together.
Yeah.
As well. So, there's just a lot going on in Israel's chart. And knowing that the progress VSP at 3 degrees, morning star phase, Venus star point is conjunct Venus, it highlights also Sun and Moon indirectly as well.
Yeah.
In this case.
And the asteroid Pallas Athena, we've seen Pallas Athena as the goddess of war.
Yeah.
In fact, a lot of times we say when Venus is a morning star, she's more like Athena. And when she's an evening star, she's more like the traditional Aphrodite. But there's Athena on the 7th house, and we know the 7th house to also represent open enemies. And we also know that that having a planet right on the 7th house cusp like this, exactly opposite the ascendant, is almost like there is somebody stationed at the border. In other words, every time you interact with another person or any entity outside yourself, if that planet is exactly opposite you, it's like there's a guard there. There is some kind of interaction that you have to go through that planet in order to really connect with another person. And I think that the goddess of war is sitting on the border there of the 7th house is an apt description of what has happened all through the history of Israel's existence.
I mean, they've got no
there's
shortage of...
there's guards at the border everywhere.
And Pallas Athenas is also trining that Mars on Regulus. So it's a very well-developed system of that, that many
very well
points.
And Jupiter, look at Jupiter down there. It's a grand trine.
It's a grand trine.
And Pallas Athena in mythology, if you don't know the mythology, and I'm speaking to the audience here, of Athena, I would say she was actually the daughter. Athena was the daughter of Zeus, and pretty much his favorite daughter, and pretty much the best relationship he ever had with a female was this father-daughter relationship. And so Athena is also referenced and interpreted in many people's charts as the father's daughter. Now, that can be a strong, healthy relationship, or it can also indicate a weakened relationship. So here we have Jupiter and the father and the daughter in a good, strong fire trine with Mars there as well. So there's a unity in that. Yeah.
And Mars and Jupiter are both on very potent fixed stars. One is on the galactic center, one is on Regulus. and they're both sending
Yes.
their rays to Pallas of Venus. So it's like,
Right.
in terms of
Right.
military development, they've got it hands down, I would say. Yeah.
Yes. And um, a lot of sadness, a lot of suffering, and a lot of wounding going on here too, because the sun is opposite Chiron. And it's pretty close to an exact opposition. And so, really, even in the birth of Israel's chart, there was a sense of suffering and pain to begin with, right? That happened even pre-birth. And that was part of, that has been part of the history of the country. And not to mention the fact that we have, uh, the different aspects of Scorpio here, because we have Chiron in Scorpio, the South Node in Scorpio, and then opposite the Sun in the eighth house, which is really Scorpio's house. And all of them are pretty much squaring that Leo configuration at the top and Black Moon at the bottom. So yeah, it's a pretty intense chart. I mean, it's got a lot of glory, and it's got a lot of heroism, and a lot of you know good effects for winning wars and strategies and battles and all of that. But it also has some sadness, some pain, some suffering, and some just different aspects to it that are going to cause it to, I think with an eighth house sun, you're always going through periods of
Crises.
crisis. Yeah, that's a good word.
And also Sun,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sun Chiron opposition, alienation is real. The alienation factor. Yeah.
The Sun Chiron.
Yeah, Sun Chiron opposition is the alienation, right?
Right. Yes. Yes, definitely.
And
So
squaring that Black Moon Lilith is that it emphasizes that alienation, being the
yeah,
outsider,
especially with the
Aquarius.
Aquarius. Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. It's an exact
Because
square to the sun, the Black Moon, and then
I
also to
think
Chiron.
I think as we are taping this, there's also like now Lebanon is involved and Syria is also involved as well.
Yeah, which have
And
been historically involved in attacks against Israel as well. So that when we look at the history, they have been involved.
yeah, it's quickly
Okay,
developing.
let's move.
Yeah.
I'm going to move on to this is the war that I'm most familiar with, because I was living there in 1973, and I was living on a kibbutz, and somebody came running through the volunteer headquarters, and they were yelling, to the dining hall, there's a meeting. And so we went to the dining hall and found out that we were in a state of war. And of course, what a shock. That was a surprise as well. Um, and that was during a Mars retrograde in Taurus, not exactly on Israel's sun, but it was in Taurus and opposite Mercury. But there are a lot of correlations to this war and the state of Israel's chart that we just looked at. The 3 degrees Cancer, though, I think is the most important point that I wanted to share about this chart, because it's progressed. Star point is 3 degrees Cancer, which we talked about. And look at what Saturn's at 4, the South Node's at 2, and then Pluto's up here at 4 Libra. So there was a very tight Saturn-Pluto square going on at the time of this war. 2, Israel's Venus, which we saw at 4 Cancer. Venus's star point at 3 Cancer. And the Saturn, Pluto, and the nodes configured to all of them. Oh, also, not to mention Uranus, right on Israel's ascendant, 22 Libra. So it was another surprise attack. This is what's interesting because there's a lot of correlations between this war and this Yom Kippur war, or Yom Kippur, I think is how it is said. But this war chart and the current one, 50 years later, have been compared quite extensively, and there are many, many parallels, and I can move on to that unless you have any comments about this chart, Donnie?
I think it's pretty self-explanatory, the activations, because it's just uncanny to me.
Exactly. I
Yeah,
mean,
it's uncanny.
this is
Yeah.
why this is why astrology is so interesting because it really does tell a story, doesn't it? Okay, so here are the parallels. Here's Israel on the inside and Hamas attack most recently on the outside. October 6th was the exact 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War, 1973. That was a surprise attack. This one was a surprise attack. Uranus was involved in both cases, then on the ascendant, now on the sun. Then, interesting. 1973 was a holiday, Yom Kippur. That's why they called it the Yom Kippur War. And the borders were basically deserted. I mean, there were some people at the borders, soldiers at the borders guarding, but it was a high holy holiday, and most of them were at home celebrating with their families. 2023 was also a holiday. It and I suppose the borders were also not as um, heavily protected as they normally are. 1973 was an invasion on three fronts, all land, but three different areas where they had broken through the border. 2020, and it was three countries actually at that time that had done it. 2023 was an invasion via three modes, air, land, and sea. So yeah, Israel's defenses were down both times. What was surprising to everybody this time around was with its world-renowned intelligence, how did this one slip through the radar? Hamas was training their forces very, very, very close to the border, easily spotted by Israel if they were looking. Hamas has been receiving funding from hidden sources. Uranus on Israel's sun, eighth house. Again, we talked about other people's money. And the sun's in the 12th for this attack. Okay, Uranus is in the 8th. We were talking about the shadow or the dark houses. Very weird. Pluto transiting Israel's 4th house, Uranus transiting Israel's 8th house, and the sun and the eclipse on Israel's 12th house near the ascendant. So, any comments about that?
Actually, this is very much tied to, I think, one of my social media posts earlier, I think some weeks back. This was actually seeded back when the April 20th, 2023 hybrid solar eclipse came in at 29 degrees, 50 minutes of Aries.
Aries, 29 Aries, the one we had this past April, that was a solar eclipse. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. And that was triggering the previous Libra star point at 29 degrees, 26 minutes of Libra.
Yes, exactly. We were all
And
looking at that. Yeah.
And I basically plotted, if I may share, the astrocartography of that eclipse
Yes.
that's over the that's happening around that time. Okay, can you see the chart here?
No. Do I
You'll
have to
probably need
stop
to
my
unshare.
share?
Yeah. Yeah. So
Okay.
this is the
What?
astrocartography of the 29 degrees, 50 minutes Aries hybrid solar eclipse that happened on 20th
Okay.
April of this year. And you can see that Pluto very close to the midhaven, so close around Cyprus and also like Israel,
Yeah.
Palestine is so close. So there's
And
already a hint
Uranus
of
too.
something.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I've included these two parents, which is the intersection between two astrocartography lines. And I've got the Uranus and Pluto line cutting pretty close high up in Syria, but they definitely can feel it down in Israel.
Yeah.
So this Uranus Chiron line, just let me shift this a little bit. Okay. This Uranus and Pluto Paran line that cuts
Mm-hmm.
across Syria
Right.
can really be about the energy of the process of transformation, or there's this kind of collapse of the old order or construction of the new. There's almost like
Mm-hmm.
a revolutionary energy, but it also brings together an extreme desire for freedom and change as well.
Mm-hmm.
Last
Well,
but not, yeah,
this is amazing that you are posting this, because I'm looking at this happened last April, and Uranus and Pluto Paran is a pretty big deal.
yeah.
Uh, and look at it right through the Mediterranean. What have we had all year? We had a big giant earthquake in Turkey, in southern Turkey, right on that Uranus Pluto. We had fires in Greece. Again, devastating fires in Greece and in Spain and in Morocco. We had, didn't we have an earthquake in Morocco, or something happened there
Mm-hmm.
that caused a lot of damage? And you know, all the way along here, we had islands evacuated in Greece, on the Greek islands, right where that line is, both Rhodes and Corfu, two sides of Greece, but they were both around the same latitude, that were also evacuated. So that Uranus Pluto Haran has caused a lot of disturbance in the world, even just this year.
Yeah. And the Uranus Pluto parent also talks about burning bridges behind oneself and the drastic situations that
Literally,
literally
literally.
and drastic situations that unleash pent up energy.
Yeah, yeah,
So all these
definitely.
things, or you can represent like giving into the deepest urges for change. It can also be one of those. So let me move on to the next sorry. That's very interesting, which is the Chiron series parent, in which this region feels it very potently as well. And when we talk about Chiron and series parent, um, first of all, Chiron is really about healing or injured or wounded entity, being harmed or doing harm, or it also can deal with alienation. That's what Chiron is about. Series is about food and anything that's ingested orally. It also can mean grains and vegetation as well, or farming, agricultural stuff. If I combine the two together, this can actually mean Chiron and Ceres together in a parent. It means malnutrition and starvation. We all know that water and necessities were initially cut off to Gaza, from one
Yeah.
side to the
I
other.
think of
And
Ceres also as the grieving mother, the
the
grieving
plutonium
mother
mother.
who's lost
Yeah.
her child. In this case, the suffering, the Chiron, the pain and the suffering over, not just the barren earth, but the side of Ceres, that she's the goddess who provides the abundance, but she's also the goddess who makes the earth barren when she's not happy, according to the story. So,
It's
and according to the seasons. So this Chiron series is more again of a bigger picture, not just like personal, but more of a collective manifestation of hunger, suffering, loss of children, loss of loved ones, this sort of thing.
And Chiron series can also mean some sort of poison that's ingested. And I actually looked at the planetary correspondence of white phosphorus because white phosphorus bombs were used in very recent days. Phosphorus is actually ruled by Pluto. Bombs are ruled by Uranus. I find it so
Wow.
uncanny that the
Interesting.
energy,
Interesting.
it comes out like so literally. I was chilled to the bone actually. And
Yeah. Yeah. It
Ceres and
is chilling when
Chiron,
you look at this. So there's Venus going over Iran. What do you think about that? What is Iran's role in all of this?
Iran, uh,
I mean, it's going right over Tehran, but there is the Uranus Pluto crossing there too.
I
So
mean,
it's a kind of a mixed bag.
Iran did say that they are behind the support for Hamas. So it could be that Venus line that's, crossing Iran as well. I do have a chart later that kind of ties stuff together
Okay. Well,
regarding
we'll look at your
Iran's like,
charts. Yeah, we'll look at those charts later
yeah.
when we do your
Um,
thing. Um,
and Ceres and Chiron, I just want to say one last thing. It's also about animal activists. And there was
oh,
actually
yeah.
in the news, there was actually a term that's coined calling the innocent Palestinians uh, by the other side as human animals.
Mm,
And a lot of protest activism around the world came to their defense. So it's the animal activism, but it's an indirect way. How this actually manifested with all
mm,
the energy, like Uranus and Pluto, like is on a worldwide level, that people came out in support of, that side of the story.
mhm.
And also, as you mentioned earlier, series is also about the Plutonic mother archetype. That's how I would call a series. And so this can mean, together with Chiron, harm to children. And together with Uranus and Pluto, this mean, innocent children that's been unalive in the process because of the conflict. I'll
Mhm.
leave it as that. So you may continue with yours. I just want to put this out there. It's actually
Oh,
linked to
yeah.
this
Well, no,
eclipse.
that was very interesting. That
Yeah.
was very interesting.
Yeah.
Um, all right, I'll put
Sure.
my screen back. Um, so my next slide,
Yeah.
my next slide is my version of astrocartography. Now, I had said before I don't usually engage in political discussions and astrology, but it is still quite interesting. And I did learn most of my political astrology forecasting from Jim Lewis, who created astrocartography. He was able to really look at many, many wars around the world and connect them to US presidents who we were fighting with at that time. And, he had numerous articles on that subject, but I won't go into all of that now. Just to say that when you see something passing over a certain place, it's kind of interesting. Jupiter has been kind of hovering over 15 degrees Taurus, which is a world point. The world point is, 45 degrees from zero cardinal, 15 degrees of fixed. So Jupiter is sitting over the Middle East right now. And this is the geodetic map. I'm using the geodetic map than actually a timed map at this point because the timed map, well, that says something, but this says something bigger picture where these planets are going to be there for a while, especially the outer planets. So I wanted to show how this is Israel's natal chart. This is Israel's natal chart with what they were born with. And as you can see, it's got Mars here at the geodetic IC, crisscrossing our Paran with Hygeia, another goddess of healing, similar to Chiron, but definitely implications for health. Okay. And the other thing, actually, this is not the natal chart. This is the transiting chart. This is the transiting chart. I was trying to think, no, this can't be right. I'm looking at this going, no, this can't be right. This is where Jupiter is right now. This is the transiting chart of the Middle East, of the geodetic map of the Middle East, where everything is right now. So I circled Tehran because there's Saturn and Uranus forming a Paran quite near it with the black moon there. Here's Israel. The Jupiter retrograde is moving towards it. So it's moving towards the scene of it's here right now in Iraq, but it's moving towards the as it's in retrograde, it's moving towards Israel. Here's the natal geodetic map for Israel. This one is the one that I was talking about with there's enemy all around, all the neighbors seem to be enemies, because here's Saturn slicing right through Israel on the geodetic map of the birth chart of Israel. Now, what does that mean, Saturn on the ascendant? You've got two different people, two different groups, probably more than that, but let's just say for now, two different groups living in Israel occupying that land. You've got the Palestinians, you've got the Israelis or the Jews. And the basic pattern here with Saturn slicing right through the middle of the country is it's almost like Saturn does represent walls and borders and boundaries. So it's almost like you've got a wall between two important factions of the country, literally. It is kind of the build the wall type of an energy anyway. And then it's surrounded Egypt. Pluto is in Egypt. And Egypt in past wars has been the one who's done a lot of the who's been involved in a lot of the initiation of acts of war against Israel in Israel's history. I don't think it's been involved this time around. At least I haven't heard anything about that. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there was a peace agreement between Egypt and Israel a while back, and maybe they're holding to that agreement. But on this side of Syria, we've got the Black Moon going right through Syria. We've also got Saturn and the Black Moon surrounding Lebanon and all of that. So, and Chiron and Mars close to Tehran. So there again, we have a number of, let's say, if you were looking at this map going, should I live here? Is this a place I should live? What is this a good idea to move here? You'd see this collection of planets here, and you might actually reconsider any idea that you would have, because unless you are really contributing to being a part of the process that is helping to solve some of the major issues that are going on there, then, and if you have a reason like that to be there. Another thing, Maurice Fernandez showed a video that he made on September 11th on the upcoming eclipse, and in it he featured the chart of Benjamin Netanyahu. I'm not showing Netanyahu's chart here because I think Maurice did a fabulous job in this video showing how it was going to affect him. And he said he's going to have to be very careful, very careful. This eclipse will not have him walking on eggshells. Rather, he will need to walk over hot burning coals. So there's a little clip here. If you're watching this, you can click that, and you can see what Maurice had to say about it featuring the chart. And then I just want to conclude with that we are at the final pass of the Pluto return for the US. The first pass, as I mentioned earlier, was in February of 22 with Venus just coming out of its retrograde and emerging as a morning star, and that was the war in Ukraine. And now we're at the last pass of the Pluto return in October of 23 for the US. Venus again coming out of its shadow of retrograde as a morning star, and the war with Israel begins. And at this very moment, the United States is in a great deal of chaos. Not only is it having a Pluto return, but as you can see, Eris is down here at 24 Aries. Eris, the goddess of chaos and discord, is also coming to square that Pluto and is within orb. It's exactly on the nodes, and Mars is on the other node. So you've got Mars and Eris. And by the way, in mythology, Mars, whose Greek name was Ares, Ares, and Eris, Eris, were siblings. They were brother and sister. And together, when they came together, they really delighted in making mischief, causing humans to, basically turning the earth upside down in various places. So with Mars and Eris on the eclipse, on the nodes and the eclipse points, this is hot. This is really charged for both the US right now and really the world. Because those transits are affecting the whole world, but we are in the Pluto return. We are definitely in the Pluto return, and the House, meaning the House of Representatives, the Congress, the U.S. Congress, is literally divided right now. The GOP is in chaos in its attempt to bring a new Speaker of the House forward, and there's a lot of drama going on with the ex-president and the current president and the upcoming election in 2024 and all of that. So I don't think things are going to settle down anytime soon for the US, even though we just had the last Pluto return. The other thing I wonder about, and I sometimes, feel a little bit curious about, is that Pluto is in the second house of the United States chart. Now, this is the preferred chart of the United States. I have to mention here that there are several others out there that propose a Scorpio rising for the United States, or a Gemini rising, or even a Virgo rising I've seen. But this is the Sibley chart, 12 degrees Sag rising. It's what most astrologers use. There are times that I really like this chart and times that I don't. But this chart, I'd say, definitely puts Pluto in the second house. So one would assume that a Pluto return in the second house, is going to have a lot to do with money, finance, and resources, and the banks. And a lot of astrologers were looking at this Pluto return as, what's happening with the money markets and interest rates and all sorts of things, the economy of the United States. But it's already poured billions of dollars into the Ukraine war effort, and now it's pouring a lot of funding into Israel. And my question would be, is the United States, really have the funds, have enough resources to keep funneling all of this money out of the country? Or are they going to go bankrupt? Not bankrupt, but are they going to be severely damaging their assets, their reserves?
I do have a parting thought with exactly the point that you just made. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. For the audience later.
Okay. You have a thought about this.
I do. Yeah.
Do you want to say it now or wait?
Um, I'll wait till you finish. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I am finished. That was the
Oh, you're
last
finished.
slide.
Okay.
I'm um I am really praying for
Yeah.
peace, and I'm putting this video out today with the intention that that we can all tune into this. And a lot of people are already, but it's just my way of saying wanna wanna contribute to that.
Cool. So I'm gonna take a different route with things. And
As you often do.
yeah. So I know this is a very complex chart, but I plotted the chart of Israel on the innermost wheel, and then Palestine
Okay.
on the middle wheel, and the outer wheel will be when the event actually took place that trigger off, what we have in terms of conflict in the Middle East. And I've mentioned earlier about Speaker, which is right on Israel's ascendant, and then Procyon, which is on um, Israel's midhaven. And of course, they've got a very strong Mars for Israel that's on Regulus.
Regulus.
But
Yeah.
what is very interesting here is that why of all days they pick it on Putin's birthday this
Very
time round.
interesting.
And because why do I say that? And that's because the sun, which is the ruler of the current Leo Venus star point,
Yeah.
sun is the ruler of Leo, and Leo is at 13
Meaning the
degrees.
sun's in Leo, the Venus star point's in Leo. So we're actually tracking the sun during
Via
this cycle,
transit.
during this
Yes.
9-month cycle of the Venus star point in Leo. We're actually tracking the movement of the sun all the way around the wheel.
Or the transit sun can serve as a trigger that's linked to the Venus star point in Leo.
Yes,
In
it
other
is
words,
always.
for
Yeah.
this 9.5 months approximately, yeah, because that's roughly the interval.
Yeah, it won't go a full year, but it will go for about 9+ months.
Nine and
Yeah.
a half months on the average. So
Till
the sun
June.
is, yeah, June 5th, I think next year. So
Yes.
tracking the sun's movement will be what I'm looking at. And sun at 13 degrees of Libra. 13 degrees of Libra is also on this fixed star that's called Algorab, which is the energy of the crow.
The crow.
And Algorab is also very much linked to terrorist attacks, by the way. And there's the Putin connection.
That fixed star at 13 Libra is terrorist attacks.
Yes, it's linked to that. Yeah.
Okay.
And if we
So
actually
that
look,
sounds like algal, but it's not algal.
Algorab,
You're saying it's a different
yeah, Algorab, Algorab. Yeah.
algorab. Okay.
Yeah. So it's symbolized by the crow.
Okay.
And it's in the 12th house. 12th house, there can be like a double-edged sword. On one hand, it can be very stealth attack kind of energy. But
Well,
because it's in this,
that's definitely true for Putin.
yeah, but
Secret attacks. Yeah.
the other hand, because it's 12th house and Libra, it can also be inferring. I know it's a bit, because I'm always Gemini, I'm providing both sides of the story. It's a stealth attack, but it also can be an inside job as well.
An inside
There's
job,
also, it also
meaning
can, I'll leave it as that. Inside job can be, because if we think about things in a more holistic, broad-based manner, we know that Israel is so well developed in terms of their defenses. And knowing how the attack actually happened, this also backs also another alternative perspective in terms of questioning that were they actually allowed to go through as well? I'll just leave it as that. And I've highlighted using color coding, all those in blue. This can represent like the damage and the mass destruction of what's going on with the water, with the food, with the fuel being cut off to Gaza. This is very much indicated by those activations that's in blue over here.
Yeah.
And
Oh
those
my God.
in
That's a lot.
And those in deep purple are actually demonstrating like Israel is so well developed in terms of intel, the intelligence on the military level. And there's like this two kind of very contradicting narrative. And that's how I basically zoomed in on that transit sun, which is on Algorab, the crow, in the 12th house in Libra. That just passed by Israel's Neptune, which is in their 12th house. And the transiting ascendant on the day of the attack is pretty much bang on Israel's Neptune in the 12th house. So,
12th house again behind the scenes.
Something
but
fishy.
That means that Neptune Neptune's permanently in Israel's chart at that degree of that Algorab, that fixed star.
Close to. It's roughly
Very
3 degrees
close.
away. Yeah.
Okay.
And Libra represents transactions. 12th house is behind the scenes. So I don't know what's being transacted here. I'm just saying some deal making in the background going on.
Yeah.
So there's more than meets the eye, I would say. And the other thing that I want to spice up this presentation, I suppose you can call it that, is whether...
So you've got the chart of Palestine in the middle. Can we go back to that for a moment? That last slide. I haven't really seen too many charts of Palestine. You're basing this on its creation in 1988.
15 November, yeah.
That's when Palestine was created, was in 1988, because I have a date when Hamas was created in 1987, December. Or 2007. I had 3 dates pertaining to the Leo star point. Hamas was founded December 10th, 1987. That was a Leo star point. In fact, that was the birth of the Leo star point, 1987. If you remember, 29 Leo. And we saw how 28 Leo this year, Venus, and then the Venus star point. Then, they all played a role. Mars on Regulus, all Regulus star point, they're all playing a role. The Israel-Hamas attack, Leo star point, and there was another Leo star point here too. Can't remember.
Interesting that you
what
said
the other
that.
one was. Hamas founded, and the attack this year, and then there was a blockade. Okay. Anyway, there were 3 events pertaining to the Leo star point. On that.
Because the transit Venus was so
the
close
blockade
to...
of Gaza was instituted in 2007. I'm sorry to interrupt. That I just found my notes.
So there's a lot of 29 degree on Regulus, what you just mentioned, because you did mention that Hamas was formed under the transit Venus star point. No, sorry. Let me just rephrase. Hamas was formed when the transit Venus star point active in the sky was the first one in Leo at 29. And if that's the case, then this chart even make more sense, because if I actually look at the Palestine's chart, which is the middle wheel, the ascendant is at 29 Leo. And the transit
29
Venus,
Leo in Palestine's chart. Okay. Well, there's a lot of Regulus going on here in the I mean, this is the star that keeps coming back over and over again in the Lion. And so that's got to have a lot of meaning for this whole the whole history of the wars and and on the major events that are going on.
And this is tied to the previous transit Venus star point at 29 Libra because it forms an exact 60-degree sextile aspect to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like some things were already cooking under the Libra star point when that Libra star point faced in.
Right.
Last October, you know. And this Leo
Right.
star point just basically brought everything to the surface.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the sun of Palestine it looks like, is also in the eighth house. Oh no, that's Israel's eighth house. Okay. No, the sun of Palestine. Where is the sun? Oh, there it is
Sun
in
in
Scorpio, 22
22,
Scorpio.
yeah,
Okay.
which is still a square, you know.
It's on Chiron's Chiron.
Yep.
Remember the Chiron sun opposition, and it's also exactly opposite Israel's sun.
Yep.
So the sun of Israel and the sun of Palestine are in opposition to one
In
another.
opposition.
I mean, what could be more clear than that?
Yeah. Opposition is a Libra energy as well. So you can
Working out,
see,
working out conflict, working out.
so you can see how there's more Libra stuff playing out than we think, you know. So that's why I'm also reading the Leo Venus star point currently that's doing its thing, but I can't ignore the previous one, which is the first phasing in of the Libra transit Venus star point, because I
Right.
think they're so much linked. And if I were to be more holistic in my approach, this is basically the 5 active Venus star points in the sky right now. So I actually
Right.
look at things more holistically. The head of the Venus star is at Leo, and then to the left is the receiving side, to the right is the giving side, and then I'm looking at all 5 points. Yeah.
Right.
To just
Right.
give a more holistic pentagram analysis, I suppose you could call it that. I call this the pentagram
Right.
mandala. And okay, the next chart is also going to be a bit, So is this country involved as well? Um, because the country on the innermost wheel,
So
it,
tell us what tell us what
yeah,
we're looking at here, each
okay.
individual.
So the innermost wheel is the wheel of Iran, because they actually came out and say that yes, we are helping Hamas.
So this was the
And
creation of Iran in 1979, the middle
yeah,
wheel. So we're looking at everything on the outside in relationship to Iran's natal chart. Is that what you're
because
saying? Okay.
because the because Iran came out and said that yes, we are backing Hamas.
Okay.
So it'll be interesting to look from that perspective, and anything that's stacked on top of Iran's chart is like giving that like that background influence of stuff, you can call it that. And in the
Okay. So
middle
the second chart, yes.
is the leader of, the CCP. And he's got a lot of activations from this current transit Leo star point. I've highlighted all those in brown or deep red. I think it comes out as brown. He's got a lot of planets at 20 to 21 degrees of a sign. So that's very much in the line of fire by that transit Leo star point we have now. And on the outermost, I've replotted the chart of the attack itself.
Okay.
And I just want to see whether is there any linkage between the middle chart, whether the leader of this country is somehow involved. And I do see quite a number of connections here. Iran's part of fortune with China's leaders, Neptune and Saturn, is very much tied together.
Mm-hmm.
And the key connection here is China's leaders, Pluto on 20 Leo, it's close enough to be connected to the Black Moon Lilith of Iran.
Mm-hmm.
What else do I
Oh,
see?
speaking of 20 degrees Leo in China's leader, Pluto, that's the Venus star point this year.
Right now. Yeah.
So this Venus star point cycle that we're in is on the leader of China's Pluto.
Yes, and in his
Wow.
well, I only got his rectified natal chart, but it's in his first house. He's got a Leo
But
rising.
is that is a pretty accurate day of birth, if not time,
Yeah.
right?
The time is rectified, but it doesn't stray far because I've tested this chart a number of times. Yeah. And it still
Okay.
holds up.
And but the date, of course, the
Yes.
time won't matter. Pluto's always going to be at 20 Leo in
Yeah.
in his chart.
Right. And if we just zoom a bit backwards into the Libra Venus star point at 29 degrees 26 minutes, I've highlighted the connection between the charts using the boxes in, you can call it magenta, I suppose. And Iran's Jupiter is exactly squaring that star point at 29 Libra in the
I
8th.
see. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then you've got also a connection between China's leaders, the China leaders, Pallas Venus, with Iran's moon in Iran's sixth house.
Yeah.
So sixth house can be debt or some money that's being transacted in some way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm.
Or there's some kind of perfection energy because it's a Virgo house. But in the sign of Taurus, it's more like financial stuff
Mm-hmm.
as well. And going back to the current transit Venus star point at 20 Leo, Iran does have their Neptune in Sagittarius at 20 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
So they've been pretty upfront. They say they're involved with this. And this leads me to think, after whatever linkages that I've found, that, yeah, somehow this country's involved as well, together with Russia. That's what I'm alluding to.
Okay, quite a conclusion. All right. Well,
So
not a very pleasant topic to be discussing, but neither is this whole situation we're facing right now. So,
neither, but I just want to like open up the conversation to even a larger thing. There's one last thing I want to display here. So what's the end game here for the US if they are actually somewhat involved? This actually links to one of the rarer meanings of Venus. Venus, one of the meanings can be triangulation, which means the power of three. So people are saying that we are already entering like World War III. But then I actually still see another one that's being stirred, this time in the Pacific, which is Taiwan, coming up.
mm-hmm.
And if I were to go back to the chart of Israel, the transit moon is at 20 degrees. It's 5 degrees away from the midheaven of Israel. If I use the power of progression, so it's 5 degrees difference between the transit moon and the midheaven. So I'll be anticipating something in around 5 months after this event actually started on 7th of October, which is March
That takes us to
2024.
March. Yeah,
March
takes us to
2024.
March.
And I've done in a separate presentation. I think it was I think it was earlier this year that I did mention that after end of March, the whole thing regarding China and Taiwan, all bets are off. So this leads me to think, and this
I've
is
heard
5
you
degrees.
say that before, between Taiwan and China. Yeah.
And this leads us into March to April 2024, when the progress moon reaches the midheaven over here. So there can be like another huge thing coming. So
Right.
what's the end game here? Okay.
Yeah. What is the
Venus,
end game?
Venus triangulation 3, power of 3. So one is Ukraine, one is now it's Israel, Palestine, and the next one can well be Taiwan, China. Wars are very expensive to
Yes.
fund. And I've basically got this from like an article which was widely shared. And this thing really like just finishes up the story for me. This is just a clip from the one of the you can call it a think tank article. And after translation, it actually means that whatever energies that surrounding it is to really push US to print more money and print more money into oblivion. Because as you mentioned earlier, Ariel, billions are given to Ukraine. Now with this in Israel, and if Taiwan is also the third, I mean, this is like
It could
the
bankrupt. It could
yes,
potentially bankrupt the US, is what you're saying. And it's what I was looking at with the Pluto return in the second house was how is it affecting the financial health and well-being of the United States? But we haven't gotten there yet. So, let's hope we don't get there. But definitely it's going to exhaust the resources or definitely put a
second house resources, yeah, in the
yeah,
US chart, yeah, and Pluto is there. So
yeah.
with the return, this can be that. And
Hmm.
I think that's enough. I've got some more, but yeah, that
Yeah.
can be saved for another time. I just want
Well,
to give
thank
the
you for that,
audience
Donnie. And the one thing I wanted to remind people of is that the bigger picture for me has been all along has been that the 2020s is really erupting into so many um, um, explosions in so many different directions, and also endings and new beginnings. I feel like the 100 years after Scorpio ends will bring a period of such exhaustion with war and killing that by the time we get firmly into the Libra star point, but that's not until 2030. We had a peak at the Libra star point in 2022. And for this 4 year period until 2026, we're between Libra and Scorpio. It's going back and forth. 2026 brings us to the last of the Scorpio star points. And then by 2030, Libra will be here to stay for 100 years. So it's a really big period of transition, not just for one country, but for the whole world and all of us in it. And not just about war, but I have to say that with Mars and Pluto ruling Scorpio and Venus ruling Libra, that the trend away from Scorpio into Libra has got to be away from war and into peace and into somehow cooperation, because I think the whole of humanity is at stake if we don't learn how to cooperate with one another. So that is my final feeling about what this transition is all about. But it's also leading us into a more of a Venus. Venus is not represented, has not been represented in our lifetime on this 5-pointed star at all. None of the signs that Venus is involved with has been on the star since many of us were born. The last of the Taurian star people, the last of the Taurus star occurred in the 1920s going into the 30s, so also 100 years ago. And I might add one more thing about that I found interesting when I was researching the Venus star to begin with. At the end of this Taurus star in the late 20s and the inception of the Aries star, which was 1929, we had a huge banking crisis in the world based on the crash of the Wall Street market in 1929. And so Taurus phased out, a sign of money and banking. And at the time that Taurus phased out, Scorpio came in. So we had, we resurrected from that. We got back on our feet again. But a lot of it has been about this last 100 years. A lot of it has been about money and power and who's got the wealth and how are you going to get the wealth? How are you going to take it? Now we're phasing out of Scorpio. Taurus is not in. So it's going to be the first time in a very long time, really 200 years, that we haven't been dealing with an actual sign that deals with money on the Venus star. So I think the way we do business, the way we trade, the way things are happening, we're going to be moving away from the whole question about what is money, how do we use it, what is it based on, what you just said about paper money, is that where it is at? Probably not. The whole idea of currency and value is going to be changing.
Or the usage of currency for hegemony purposes.
Yeah, that too.
Also that as well. Yeah.
Well, Donnie, thank you.
I know it's a very loaded conversation, but I just had to
It's
say
very
what.
loaded, and we've gone quite a while now. We've gone about an hour and a half. So I will talk with you again soon. Tell everybody where you can be reached.
Oh yeah, people can reach me on my website, on WordPress. What's called Alchemy Light, one word. And you can find me on Instagram, on well, I'm not so active on Twitter, now X. What else? Facebook is another place to find me, basically the major social media platforms.
Okay, good. Donnie Lim, thank you very much for being here. I'm ArielleGuttman, the creator of this version of the VenusStarPoint that we're talking about. And you can find more about that in my books and at my website, SophiaVenus.com. And tune into this YouTube video channel, the official VenusStarPoint channel, for more videos and experiences about discovering how the VenusStarPoint works in our lives. So thank you, and I'll say goodbye for now. Bye.